At that time we planned to have a party at Lina's cabin. The 5 of us packed up Lina's old RV and prepared enough food and beer. Unfortunately, a sudden storm broke out. The heavy rain pounded mercilessly on our windows. Halfway through the drive, one of the tires blew out. "Is everyone okay?" Lina asked, gripping the steering wheel. We almost crashed into a tree at that moment. Everyone was startled. After checking, we found that aside from minor scratches, everyone was fine. James took out his phone and said, "I think I got a signal." 13 minutes later, he said a tow truck had been dispatched. But there was one problem. It would take hours for it to arrive. James groaned. We all jumped out of the RV to find a flat spot and set up some chairs. James motioned for me to follow him, and I found he had chosen a place where we could see the main road. That way we could spot any rescuers coming our way. James and Lina brought chairs and beer, while James and I went to gather firewood. Once we got back to the clearing, I lit a campfire. I was probably the only one with real outdoor experience. We moved the chairs as close to the fire as possible. "Have you guys ever heard of a campfire ritual?" James asked, judging from our blank expressions. It was obvious we hadn't. It means we each have to offer something that feels special to us into the fire, and then tell the scariest thing we've ever experienced. This ritual will make those scary things stop haunting us. We looked at each other in disbelief. I don't know if wishes really come true, but I just hope it's not about ghosts. Xiaomi reached into her purse and pulled out a shimmering blue bookmark. This was from my little brother. He said it reminds me of the necklace I always wear. She held it for a while, then tossed it into the burning flames. Her expression turned serious. Xiaomi's silence lasted a few seconds, making the rest of us uneasy. "Next, I'm going to share with you something that happened to me and my boyfriend." He exaggeratedly glanced around and frowned, saying, "Actually, the story I'm about to tell happened right here." "You're lying," James said, tossing his blonde hair over his shoulder, and glanced behind us at the darkening woods. He shivered. He was scared. "Don't get so worked up, James said. None of us had ever been here before. It was Lina's first time inviting us to her cabin. Lina poked James' arm and warned him, "If you don't shut up now." James rolled his eyes. Fine. Xiaomi gave Lina a grateful look. We were heading to her lakeside cabin for the weekend. At the time, just like now, it was getting dark and starting to rain. Kiao was driving fast. I kept telling him to slow down. Suddenly, a woman appeared right in front of us. Kiao slammed on the brakes, but it was already too late. He pulled the car to the side and backed up to the spot where he had hit the woman. We got out and ran to the middle of the road, but Xiaomi leaned back in her chair, staring at the flickering flames, and continued, "There was no one there. If that were real, I really would have screamed," James said. At the time, we almost screamed too. Anna smiled and said, "I was already ready to turn back to the city." But Kiao said, "It was only a few minutes more to the lake. Turning back would take even longer." In the end, he calmed me down. Behind us at the time, the rustling of animals in the woods had gone silent. It was as if the whole forest was listening to the story. I have to admit, I got goosebumps. So, we kept driving. Xiaomi whispered. We all leaned closer to listen. Then the woman appeared, again in the beam of the headlights. Kiao didn't stop the car. He just kept driving until we reached the cabin. We got out of the car. Safety was just within reach. But before we reached the door, that woman appeared in front of it. Her face was disfigured. Her floral dress was torn to shreds, her skin deathly pale. She pointed at us with thin, bony fingers and said, Xiaomi jumped up from her chair and shouted. We all screamed and stared at her. But in reality, she hadn't said anything. She said nothing at all. But she was definitely pointing at us. We got back in the car. Tiao drove me home. After that, I never saw him again. What? That's awful, you said it so calmly. Didn't he ever call you? No, Anna said. He killed himself. What? James said, you must be joking. Xiaomi. Xiaomi didn't respond to James. Instead, she relaxed in her chair and took a big gulp of beer. Do you think you can tell it better? Of course I can. James sneered. He reached into his bag and pulled out a ribbon. This was given to me during my hospital internship by a cancer patient. He threw it into the fire. We all watched the flames swallow the delicate pink fabric. During my time working in the hospital, I came into contact with many sick and dying people. But the thing that made me question most whether the first chose the right profession was palliative care. James paused and looked at all of us. He lowered his voice. I've never told anyone else this. Hearing their stories of fighting illness, and then a few days later finding their bed empty, it really bothered me. I even talked to the hospital's therapist about it. He stared into the campfire, and we looked at each other, shocked by the vulnerability of our friend's silence. Let me guess. Lina broke the unsettling silence and laughed as she spoke. A room where someone had died. The call light came on, or maybe a blurry figure appeared on the surveillance footage. Or maybe not. James whispered, it wasn't like that. A patient who woke up said, I'm going to die. That was really strange. Almost everyone who went there had said their goodbyes and signed the do not resuscitate papers. They didn't want to be revived, to endure more days of pain. He shook his head. But there was one, around 35 years old, a young mother with advanced breast cancer. She refused to accept her situation. That was supposed to be inspiring. But sadly, James smiled and reached out and touched his blonde hair. She was once beautiful, before she became the bald, gray-haired, shriveled woman I came to know. She still clung to the hope of overcoming the inevitable end. Her family accepted reality, but she said she wanted to spend as much time as possible with her children. He took a deep breath. I thought she was being selfish, making her children see her in that state. They all knew she was dying. She was tormenting her family. Our eyes followed him to the ashes of what was once a pink ribbon on the ground. One night she died. 3 times in a row. The 3rd time I was there. During the 8th minute of CPR. Just as we were about to declare her dead, she suddenly gasped for breath. James suddenly stood up, knocking over his chair. He breathed heavily, his voice echoing through the pine trees. We all widened our eyes and leaned back. His speech quickened. The staff stepped back in fear. A look of horror spread across his face as he frantically scanned the room, then slowly exhaled. James imitated her expression, her lover's unease, her neck stretched out. Turning to look at each of us, the woman raised her dying arm and pointed a weak finger straight at me. James said, while doing the same gesture toward Lina. Her eyes widened, and in a hoarse voice she said, "You died again." She dragged out the last word until all her breath was gone. The fireflies were once again surrounded by silence. And then what happened? James asked as James collapsed into his chair. I don't know. I left in a hurry. A few days later she died. What do you think she saw when she suffocated? James asked. While tapping on her phone screen, James rolled an empty beer can and it bounced back from James' foot. Are you even listening? No, that's too scary. James looked up and said, all right then, it's your turn next. But don't sacrifice your phone. All right, then let me tell you. The scariest thing I've ever experienced. James put down her phone. Watching the one you love most suffer. And knowing you're powerless. Do you know what that feels like? Wanting more than anything to end their pain. But unable to do so. Seeing the happiness and light in their eyes fade. Until one day it disappears completely. Can you imagine that kind of pain? Can you? I glanced around the campfire. Noticing everyone's faces were like mine. Pale and tense. Lina caught my gaze. Her lower lip trembling slightly. Then she looked away. I tried to slow my breathing, digging my nails into my palm. My sister also had cancer. James stood up and walked toward Jane, gently stroking our friend's hair. It's just, she didn't suddenly die. Like the woman in your story. Her nurse was too frightened to look at her, and decided to pull the plug. She didn't even get to say goodbye to her family. James' mouth trembled. He stammered, trying to say something, but in the end he didn't. I tried to soothe her anger. Jane met my gaze in fear. But I looked away. I didn't know what to do. So, I did nothing enough. I don't want to wait anymore. Lina smiled through tears and pulled out a gun. We've been planning this for months. Now it's time for revenge. He handed the gun to Jane. Jane took a step forward. Jane, Xiaomi and I both jumped up from our seats. He and Lina quickly forced us into a dead corner. I quickly grabbed Xiaomi's throat and pinned him to the ground, choking him as he struggled to breathe. That night, the woman you ran over, the one who tried to wave for help because her car had broken down, she was my mother. Xiaomi's eyes gradually lost their life. Jane didn't have time to react. Before a gunshot pierced the night sky, I looked to the left and saw Jane lying on the ground, blood flowing from his mouth. We carried them into the RV and sat Jane in the driver's seat and Xiaomi in the passenger seat. No wonder you drove into the store. You shouldn't have driven drunk, James said, throwing the New Year's beer can into the trash. By the time they find you, you'll have sobered up like a dead man. That's if they can even find you. They'll probably have to wait until Monday before anyone reports you missing. Then he put the car in neutral. We pushed the RV down the embankment to make it look like an accident, and even tossed in a few lit matches, just in case. Jane might not have been dead yet. We walked along the road like frightened hitchhikers, and told every driver who picked us up a different story.